I met Swami Kriyananda when I was 22 years old. I lived in Palo Alto as it happened then, and Palo Alto was just south of San Francisco, and it was really when the whole of the United States was just busting apart because of me and my generation. We were just turning the world upside down, and we were having a really, really good time doing it. And all of the Indian teachers were flocking to California because there was such a revolution happening there. And this line of masters, with Yogananda at the far end, for those of you who don't know, author of the book Autobiography of a Yogi, his influence was tremendous at that point, and globally has been so. Almost everyone who diverges from a traditional path in terms of especially spiritual values, but many other values, almost everyone has read Autobiography of a Yogi. Not all of them have made the kind of decisions I've made because of it, but one way or another, it's been a powerful influence for what we can all see is super changing times. And one of the things that Yogananda said very powerfully, he died in 1952. He spent almost his entire adult life in California, in Los Angeles, traveling around the USA, but that's where his headquarters was. Swami Kriyananda, as an American, he died 10 years ago. I never know whether to say is or was, because the consciousness of these masters is not terminated with the death of their bodies. Anyone who has loved Jesus, which includes me, is perfectly aware of the fact that he's with us if we open ourselves to him. And the expanded view that the teachings of India give us is not that Jesus was any less than he is understood to be, it's just that he was not the only. So he has lots of company. So some people who are Christians like seeing him in the middle of the altar, at least he's in the middle. Some people who are pained by their Christian experience are really unhappy to see him there. Those who were Jews get really mixed up and they don't know what to think about it. But what we're needing to think about all of this is that the past is not the future. And the times they are changing, and they're changing left, right, and center. And we can all agree on that. Whether we're going to hell in a handbasket or on our way to a new glorious age, it just depends on which side of the question you're on. But there are very few people who think that it's situation normal and will stay that way. For some people, this is very exciting. For a lot of our young people, it's extraordinarily disconcerting. And for a few of them, it's also very exciting. But once again, it's out of our control, isn't it? We can have all the opinions that we want, and it just keeps sweeping over us, just time after time. And whether it's things that are happening outside of us, which is, vast, ever-changing technology, or things that are happening to us personally in the way the generations relate to each other, the way family life has been changed so much, between things that we thought would never change are now either completely obliterated or changed beyond recognition, whether it's our own mental and emotional health, our own spiritual disappointment or aspiration, whether our physical bodies, just you name it. The very first aphorism I remember learning from Swami Kriyananda in 1969, that was when I was 22, was, the only certainty in life is change. Most people do not like change. Therefore, most people suffer. And I really have never heard it more clearly stated, including myself. And our way of, including myself, meaning that it applies to me, not that I could have said it better. I didn't want to. Being a writer and a wordsmith, I have to continually edit as I go along. Swami Kriyananda constantly edited me, meaning any statement I made that was slightly off, he would fix it. And the joke between us became, the editor never sleeps. We were on a large national radio show out of Los Angeles, and this was toward the end of his life. And whoever was the host, I no longer remember, thought that it would be interesting not only to have Swami himself, but someone who'd known him for a long time, considered herself a student, and so on. I never learned, well, I really actually want to say I never learned anything in school, but I certainly didn't learn much. And I learned not necessarily because of my teachers, but because I wasn't interested. And I learned to speak English because my parents spoke it very well. But somehow I never got the I and me thing straight. And I think finally I have, but I never did. No matter what the circumstance, Swami would correct me. And we were on this national radio show, and I was making some heartfelt point about spiritual life, but I used I and me incorrectly. He interrupted me just for fun, you have to understand. He interrupted me just for fun and fixed it. And the poor hostess couldn't understand why both of us couldn't stop laughing for several minutes, just because it was all so, there was so much fun in understanding what life is really all about, why we're here, and how joyful the whole thing can be once we stop being afraid. Now, when Yogananda was in Los Angeles in 1952, he came sent by Babaji, who's this figure here. Many people who read Autobiography of a Yogi don't remember Yogananda at all, but they remember Babaji. Babaji is what is, in the Indian tradition, is called simply an immortal. One who, in his case, retains his physical body and has for centuries, time untold, and lives even now in the Himalayas with a group of highly advanced disciples. Now, whether or not one actually takes that as the gospel truth is certainly your choice. Where I've been with a lot of these things is I have a tremendous respect for Swami Kriyananda, whom I knew personally. Yogananda I've only known in spirit. And over 45 years of close association with Kriyananda, that initial respect I had has only expanded and expanded as I've come to understand what the real potential of human consciousness is, and have seen it acted out in front of me over and over and over again, and not just sitting and chanting Om in some isolated cave, but through the extraordinary vicissitudes of financial troubles and betrayals and litigation and, health and just everything. Change is the only certainty in life. And it's not that adopting a spiritual attitude toward life suddenly gives you a pass on all the things that are going to happen. It just gives you a point of reference from which to deal with them, and gradually spiritual power that you can use as an antidote. And that's what we're talking about tonight, to use as the icebreaker to take you through those situations. And Yogananda announced very freely and frankly and dynamically that the times are changing. And there is a huge tradition, again in India, that he writes about in Autobiography, about higher and lower ages of civilization on our planet Earth. This is not original. Many, many traditional cultures have always talked about that. The Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, the Golden Age, the Age of Man, the Age of Demigod, the Age of Man, the Age of Heroes, the Age of Demigods, the Age of Gods. I believe that might have been Egyptian or Greek, I'm not sure which, but those are just two. In the Indian tradition, four again. It's interesting, it's always four. It's Kali Yuga, which is the age of matter, Dwapara Yuga, which is the age of energy, Treta Yuga, which is the age of thought, Satya Yuga, which is the age of spirit. And the obvious question is, where are we now, right? Kali Yuga is the time when matter rules. Everyone believes that what you see of the material world is exactly what it appears to be. And therefore, we are divided by race, we're divided by culture, we're divided by language, we're divided by geography, We're certainly divided by religion. You know, it has to be my way because I can't even imagine another. And the way the Indian tradition tells it is that it's a 24,000-year cycle. Half the cycle is ascending, half the cycle is descending. And it's caused by our solar system moving closer and farther away from the galactic center where the energy is. Now, this is just a quick summary of a fascinating subject. You don't have to take all of that to say the times are changing, aren't they? Because Kali Yuga is matter, Dwapara Yuga is energy. And in the year 1900, just over 100 years ago, we shifted from the age of matter into the age of energy after a 200-year transition starting in 1700. What happened just after 1900? Einstein noticed that matter isn't really there. It's really just energy. And only a few people had any idea what that meant, but that changed everything. And then all of this technology began to be discovered. It was always just sitting there, but now it was time for us to see it again. And all of these transformative discoveries were made. You know, now people have the little watches that can do all kinds of things. And they say there's more computing power in the watch. Dambara wears one of those. He has Mickey Mouse on the face, which I really enjoy, which is a nice balance between accepting and rejecting technology. I think it's very nice. When I looked at it the first time, I said, "You actually have Mickey Mouse on your watch." I said, "You're a grown man. You have Mickey Mouse on your watch." Why not? Childlike joy. Okay? But it has more computing power than the whole room full of computers. When we were transitioning closer between matter and energy, in order to have the energy, we had to have a lot of matter. Now we've just reduced it down. And where will it stop? It's a very interesting question, isn't it? Where will it stop? And the children are just born to it. To them, it just seems perfectly natural. Others of us have managed to adapt. However, there is, self-evidently, this force of energy. This is how Swami Kriyananda described it, this ever-increasing energy on the planet. We see it, we feel it. The internet has given us access to more information than we can possibly understand, and we keep rushing, trying to keep up with it. And we have all these ways of just connecting ourselves everywhere. You know, just this morning my phone rang, and my friend in California, who had no idea where I was, fortunately it wasn't the middle of the night, just dialed my number, and then we're just chatting. You know, oh, by the way, you know, I'm in New Zealand. I didn't even bother to mention it. What difference did it make? Space had just disappeared. Matter, for all practical purposes, was gone. But not everyone is rejoicing. At the same time, there is a vast movement of energy of people who just don't want it to change. And there is a lot of power coming into the planet. Everybody is feeling it, and it's really dividing our societies. You know, all of us are seeing this. Most of the time, when things are more stable and change isn't so common, the whole world just kind of hunkers kind of in the middle. The way Swami just put it simply, the world is shaped like a big fat cigar. And there's a few really good people on this end and a few really bad people on this end, and most people just float through the middle. You know, they follow the profession of their parents. Everybody just generation follows one after another. Life is very predictable. You join the church or the temple or whatever it might be that the people around you are. Everything just stays the same. And you marry within the context, and your children are raised in a certain way. All of these things, you just kind of hang out in the middle. And you don't have to try as hard to be good, because there's nothing that's challenging you not to be. Now what's happened is the middle has gotten really skinny, and both ends are getting really fat. Like this. You can't just float in the middle. You can't protect your children from anything, because the walls of the home have become absolutely permeable. You can't protect, you just can't. Nobody can control it anymore. You know, children have access to things that you never would imagine. And so they're enormously challenged. One of my friends of a generation younger than mine, 2 generations younger, he just, let's see, let me think just a moment how he put it. Oh yes, he just said something very casual to me. Oh, I know what it was. He showed me a movie that he thought I would enjoy that lasted about 8 minutes. I just couldn't bear it. It was just too cynical, too snide, too fast, too pornographic, just all these things. And my friend is a very fine person, but it was just the way things were for him. And so I just said, I can't watch this. And I walked out of the room. And then I thought, I don't want to become an irrelevant old lady. That would not be helpful. So I came back and I said, you know, the good news is this, that your generation is going to have to make its values from your own experience. And nothing in the culture is helping you. So as a result, whatever values you actually come to, they will really be your own. Now, that's challenging, but is it better just to mindlessly go along with what everybody has said and live a totally unexamined life? Well, it's more convenient and it's less unsettling. That's a fact. But is it really better? So we're having to ask ourselves really real questions like, why are we here? What is the purpose of life? My whole context of life includes reincarnation. That's a tradition of India for sure, and of many cultures. More people in the world believe in reincarnation than don't. But if you're in a culture that doesn't, well, before, you used to be able to just hold your little box. There's one Western philosopher, I'm not sure which one it was, a very well-known one, says it's no more remarkable to be born many times than it is to be born once. If you really think about it, it doesn't make, how did we get here in the first place? And why do we think this is the only one we're going to have? There's a whole lot of things that we don't know, and why would that be one that we would absolutely know? But thinking in terms of this being a much longer story than just what I remember from the beginning to the end of this one, and why are we all born so different, and with such different inclinations in different countries, different cultures? Why are our upbringing so variable? Is there such a thing as karma? That's really the question. Is there any system going on here, or is it just totally, we're just thrown up in the air and we land where we land? I mean, these were the questions, the burning questions that I had growing up. You know, what is the meaning of this world? And how can you really help people? I had this just overwhelming desire to be useful, and I couldn't find any way to be useful. I just didn't know what to do, because everything I looked at seemed to have as much against it as it did in favor of it. I just couldn't find a place to stand. And in a very quiet way, to quote Thoreau, I was living a life of quiet desperation. I mean, I was 15 years old, so it took a little while, but I just didn't know what I was going to do. But God has mercy. And when one really, 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 really longs for clarity and answers and truth, then one magnetizes that to one. First I magnetized a book, then I magnetized a teacher, just like that. And once I saw it, I never turned back. Oh, and the answer was a very simple one. Oh, everything emanates from our own consciousness. I have to, full disclosure here, just a little bit of LSD helped me see that really clearly. I never really, really, really liked drugs because I like my brain. And I didn't like anything messing with my brain. But of course I had to experiment a little to find out that I didn't like it. But actually I learned everything I needed to learn one time out. Because wow, my family, we never had any alcohol in the house, never. So I had LSD before I ever even had a beer or a sip of wine or anything like that. I started it, you know, at the end, that's all, that's just what I did. It was the 60s, what can I say? That's where we were. Dunbar recently had his 70th birthday and he had a wonderful t-shirt. I've survived the 60s twice. I don't think you brought it with you, did you? No. But anyway, there I was. But what happened was, and I'd never even known it, is that those drugs, and even Swami Kriyananda, who, believe me, does not favor hallucinogenics or any mind-altering substances, and I'm in that camp too, but it's partly because I know. But he had to admit that at that particular time and place, hallucinogenics kicked people over that edge of this, which is change your consciousness, you change everything. You see, this is the difference between energy and matter. Prior to that, if this world is just fixed, it's all you have to change you have to change what's outside of you in order to have things be different. But all of a sudden I realized it's everything I experience, I'm experiencing through the filter of my own perception of it. And if we think about it even for a minute, if I was with someone once who had an unfortunate tendency toward depression. And you know, we're having exactly the same external experiences, and she's having an unhappy experience and I'm having a perfectly cheerful one. It has nothing to do with what we're going through. It entirely has to go through with a filter of her consciousness. So I found out, oh, change consciousness, you change everything. But drugs are a really bad way to change your consciousness. It's violent and it's temporary. And it becomes even worse, it becomes terribly confusing because you become completely divided when you're high or stoned or whatever you are. And this is also true of alcohol, it just pushes you the other direction. It's like you're one person, but then everything that you really are, as soon as it wears off, you're just right back there again, except you're more confused now because you haven't developed a real coping mechanism. I mean, I think you all understand this. But I did understand suddenly consciousness, awareness, my understanding, not my experiences, but my understanding of my experiences. Why is this happening? What is happening? And it applied to everything. It applied to everything that was good, and it applied to everything that was difficult. And above all, it asked the question, who am I? Why am I here? What is birth and death? And what really brings happiness and what really brings suffering? I had a very wonderful upbringing, wonderful parents, very privileged, very just comfortable, nice, all opportunities. I just got along fine. I was a cheerful, enthusiastic person. I was school smart, which in this culture at this time opens all doors for you. Not that it's as big a value as people think it is, but I had it, so I could do it. And I was desperate to understand where happiness came from. And soon after I met Swami Kriyananda, I said, "Sir, I have always wanted to understand the secret of happiness, and I've never been unhappy." You know, it's just like, what is this? But he just looked very calmly. He said, "Past lives." And of course, I've had to integrate that a lot. You know, it's like we have all kinds of experiences that are all stored. This is actually the esoterica of the chakras, is about karma and about how karma is carried from lifetime to lifetime. Among those, oh my gosh, 2,000 videos on my YouTube channel. Type in the word karma if you're curious, and you can spend more hours than you may want listening to me talk about it. But it's worth thinking about, because if this life is just one chapter in a much longer story, then our whole relationship to it becomes very different, because it isn't just getting through with as little damage as possible, because we have to become the master of our fate, because otherwise change is the only certainty, and as long as we are fearful of change, we will always be subject to suffering. So Paramhansa Yogananda came to America and he said, the times are changing. And he said even more than that. He predicted what we're beginning to see really manifested. He said the transition between the material age and the age of energy is not a smooth one, because all of this new energy coming in, many people are taking it for personal power, to have authority over others, to do violence, to indulge in extraordinary sensuality, disregard for the welfare of others for the sake of their own aggrandizement, and simultaneously a vast number of people are understanding, oh, this is a growing age of enlightenment, and not enlightenment in art or music necessarily, although that will come. This is a growing understanding of why we're here. So on one hand, you see this wonderful accelerated unification and harmony and admiration and heart energy. And on the other hand, you see an ever-hardening determination to resist all kinds of change and hold things that are impossible to hold. But there's a lot of power on that side. And Yogananda said quite simply, it's not going to be an easy change. Because what we have now, and this is over, in ancient cultures, India is the only continuous culture on the planet. There have been great civilizations over time on the same landmass, Egypt, Greece, Rome, many places, but all of those cultures have gone away and something new has replaced it. India has been continuous, which means that the same truths, it's always had the same essential philosophy, which is not Hinduism, that's religion. It's Sanatan Dharma, which means either the eternal religion, or my favorite is that which is. It's not religion, it's just life, that which is. That we are here to harmonize and expand and to raise our consciousness. Another way of saying that is to increase our awareness. Think about it. It's very interesting to think about. It's a totally neutral word, awareness. It's not about culture, it's not about religion, it's just life experience, isn't it? From babyhood, what is it that we're doing? We're increasing our awareness. A little child doesn't even know that object that periodically flashes across its face and scares it is its own hand, because it has no control and it has no awareness of what it is. So sometimes you swaddle a child because they get scared when their hands go by. Or the little babies discover their toes. Then they just love their toes. But they don't know that it's their toes. They're just toes. They just exist and they can be chewed on and they're very comforting. We just think it's so adorable, but we're not that different. Just depends on who's bigger than us. So we get our little worlds all set up. We make ourselves really safe. I lived for a time, for 16 years actually, in the rural community of Ananda, which is called Ananda Village, up in the hills about 4 hours north of San Francisco. And it was rustic, so we had lots of critters and creatures, but we had we had some buildings. Over time we've built, now it's a full village, but then we were just building it. So we had this office building, and I worked in the office building, and this was before computers. I had a typewriter, and the building was sort of half finished, but it was finished enough for us to manage to live in it. And I came in one day, and there was this little spider, tiny little spider, who had established himself on my typewriter. And he was little, but he didn't know he was small. He thought he was really big. He was a little spider with attitude. And he was sort of perched there and kind of, watching me, I guess. I was watching him. He was darting across, exploring different parts of it like this. And I became, because I'm always philosophical, I became interested in his destiny. And I put my thumb up, and I was communicating with him that his life was now in my hands, and that at any moment his little adventuresome time could be over, because that's all I had to do, like that, right? Like this. And then while I was doing that, suddenly I had a picture of myself walking over the hill and through the meadow, about a half a mile from where I lived to where I worked. And I saw myself walking along, kind of small, but with attitude, like walking across the meadow. And I suddenly felt the hand of God just following me, just saying to me, you think you're so special, but, just like that, you could be gone. So I naturally picked up the spider really carefully and put him outside. But that depends on the point of view. And we live through that all the time. we're just not aware of things. And if you look at the progress of your life, you will realize that it's an ever-increasing awareness. It can be awareness of another language, another culture, how to be a doctor, how to program a computer, how best to take care of your children, or the awareness that, wow, this anger thing I have, I really have to work on it. Wow, I'm an alcoholic. I never knew I was an alcoholic. And you become aware of it, and you begin to work on it. I'm in the wrong profession. I'm meant to be a painter. I need to leave what I've been doing. And every step forward is always going to be a step in increasing awareness. And before we know it, we don't know it. I always love it when something breaks and somebody says, but it worked yesterday. Yes, of course, because it wasn't broken yesterday. You know, it always works until it breaks. And the fact that it worked yesterday doesn't mean that it's not broken today. And so it is with us. Until we know it, we don't know it like that. And so I ask the interesting question, is there any limit to our awareness? Because how could we know what we're not aware of? And so this leads us into God realization, self-realization, enlightenment, cosmic consciousness. And, you know, maybe you can say it's not there, but I can't say it's not there. Because if I'm not aware of it, doesn't mean it's not there. Until I took LSD, I didn't know that my consciousness was the only thing I really needed to work on. Because once I became a master of myself, then everything else would follow. I had another friend, when I was about 30, Swami Kriyananda's parents were still alive, and I became friends with his mother, and it was like her 80th birthday or something like that. She always called me her young friend, and I thought that was so cute. So I now try not to say my young friends, but frankly, that's exactly what I want to say. So I have some young friends, but let's see, now I lost the thought for a moment. Oh yes, this man who was an acquaintance, but no, that's not fair. He was a good friend. But he was not part of Ananda, is the main point. And he was attracted to this teaching, but he had lots of worldly ambitions. He wanted to do things in the world, perfectly appropriate, and just the right thing. That was his karma to do that. And he was afraid if he paid too much attention to this, what appeared to him to be a world-renouncing way of going at the world, he wouldn't be able to fulfill those desires. So, he being an intellectual type, and me being the same, I said, well, tell me, what's the biggest obstacle in your quest for success? And he was honest enough to think about it. He said, myself. You know, that I want this, but I also want that I wish to have all these accolades, but I don't really want to work that hard to get them, that my interests are divided, that I don't have mastery. You know, what's the biggest obstacle? Yourself. I said, well, that's what this path is about, is self-mastery. You know, to be able to choose, just as simple as that, to be able to choose and not be compelled. You know, I expect to have a handful of other incarnations. I hope I don't have another 5 or 6 million like I've already been through. I've been through the lizard and the chipmunk and all of those things, stages. So I think it's less in front of me than there is behind me, but I'm not going to claim that I'm at the end of the road. But I find it relaxing, honestly. I find it relaxing to think I have all the time in the world. You know, if I mess up this time, I'll just start where I left off and just keep going. I know others don't feel that way, but I do. I'm too stressed to try to aim too high. It's easier for me to aim low and be able to be a little better than that. But in any case, let's see now, let me find the thought again. Oh yes. When Yogananda talked about this transition being tumultuous, and as I said, he died in 1952, Swami Kriyananda heard him personally, and he didn't just casually say, oh yeah, times are going to get a little tough. He thundered from the pulpit that tremendous difficulties are coming. You don't have to be a prophet to say that, especially not now. Where are all these conflicting energies going to end? And a lot of people with not a lot of moral character have a lot of power. What I was starting to say a while ago, in an age like this, you see, we have the technology to blow the world to bits, literally. And we don't have the moral fiber not to do it. You know, that's where we're standing. And if you listen to the music, so-called, I always say, quote, quote, music. Yeah, I was on vacation in Costa Rica, actually, and I went to the condo where we were, and I thought they were having a public execution down by the swimming pool. That was the only explanation I had for the desperate screaming and shrieking that I heard down by the swimming pool. Of course, it was music to entertain the guests. You know, I can get to be a real curmudgeonly old lady on this point, so I won't go any farther. But when you listen, Swami Kriyananda put it, when you hear the music, you see that the world is just going for an explosion. You know, it's just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing like this, and it's for good reason, because we're just so terribly out of balance. We're out of balance with ourselves. We're out of balance with the planet, and you know, the planet responds slowly, but once it decides to respond, it's hard to stop. I live in an earthquake zone. I've only been through one small earthquake, but it was enough. I was inside a building, and the building was shaking. Logical mind says, building is shaking, get out of building. So I was just easy to do, so I stepped outside of the building. Earth is shaking. Get off Earth? You know, it's just like, all of this happens in the span of 60 seconds. But it was just very impressive to me that if our fundamental atmosphere shifts, change is the only certainty. If we fear change, we will always suffer. But you see, it's all our consciousness. Do we fear change? Who do we think we are? What do we think we are? What are we attached to? What do we think about life and death? All of these are extremely important questions, aren't they? So when Yogananda talked about these times, it was profound. And so Swami Kriyananda talked about it all the time too. And I met him in '69, and every year he would say, well, this may be the year. For 50 years, this may be the year. We all got a little casual about it, but nonetheless, it was always part of our thinking, and that what we were doing was the best investment we could make. And so that's where we come to building spiritual power against troubled times. That we had some independent conversation about the grammar of that and what that really means, and what are the opposites that we're really talking about. The only logical one I could think of, because I live in Silicon Valley, that people would talk about this investment being a hedge against inflation, or you would stand against the rising tide. And there would, implied in that, is that one is the solution to the other, isn't it? And if we're talking about world conditions, if we're talking about climate change, if we're talking about madmen with nuclear weapons, you know, there's not a lot any of us can do about this. If we think this world is only run by human egos, it's a very depressing world, isn't it? But it isn't, and that's the good news. It's run by far wiser, enlightened beings who are helping us. But also, what is human life for? Our orientation about human life is good equals easy and pleasurable. Think about that. Every time you say, oh, we had a great time, because it was easy and it was pleasurable, probably, like that. And if you say it's bad, well, it's not easy and it's not pleasurable. And that's just how our minds work. But what if this world is not designed for ease and pleasure? What if this world is designed for challenge, expansion, and inner victory? Then what is good and what is bad? If we get to have lifetimes where we just drift in the middle and never really learn a lot because we're never challenged and we're perfectly happy and we just pick the mangoes off the trees and, and then just get chubby and die, is that really what we were born to do? But if we are faced with one obstacle after another, and in the course of doing that, I don't advocate difficulties. You know, I've had enough in my life, and I'm not afraid of them anymore, but I don't go out looking for them, and I certainly don't have the nerve to pray for them. Some of my friends would pray, you know, Lord, I want all my karma in this lifetime. And I would think, whoa, not me. I'll take what you give me and I'll do my best with it, but you know, just send it out slowly. I'm just honest. I'm aware of myself. I've learned who I am at this point. But how many of us, and I stand among you, the worst of times turned out to be the best of times. Not because I enjoyed them at all, not because I went through them just when that earthquake came. Some of my friends said, oh, as soon as the earth began to shake, I just started saying, anything you want, God, anything you want, they said to me. I said, my response when the earth was moving was, and that's just what I did. I wasn't proud of it, and I recovered fairly soon. But still, my first response was just mindless terror. I thought, that's not a good response. That's not going to be helpful. You're not going to be useful to yourself or others. All my philosophy, bang, out the window. All I could think of was, what the heck is going on here? And I learned a lot from that experience. I haven't been in another earthquake, so I don't know what's going to happen next time. But all of us, if we face into the challenge that are given to us, almost always, you end up saying, well, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't have the compassion I have now. I wouldn't have the courage that I have now. I wouldn't have the wisdom that I had now. So was that a bad thing that happened to us? You see, good and bad get very confused because it all depends on what you're measuring it against. And this topic, building spiritual power against troubled times, is the topic that Swami himself came up with in the 80s and we went back to many times over the course of 40 years because he wanted to say to people, the stability of this world is uncertain. It's always uncertain, but it's more uncertain because of where we are in the shifting from a lower to a higher age and all the technology without the moral fortitude to use it properly. And Yogananda said repeatedly, the result of all these difficulties, and no, he didn't say exactly when it would happen, and no, he didn't say how long the turbulence would last. I wish he had. Time is a hard part of prophecy. That's all that they would say. But nonetheless, he said the result of it will people will have less wealth, but they will be much happier. And we will all look at each other and say, what could we have been thinking? Now, my impression of New Zealand is you're not quite as crazy as the United States, you know, especially where I live. You know, just crazy. How many $1,000 purses does a person need? I mean, how many can you use? One famous bazillionaire in America has one pair of shoes because, as he pointed out, he only has one pair of feet, you know? But that's not how everybody else is going. Where I live, people just live in a frenzy, just a constant frenzy. And when we can't, we're just going to say, what was that all about? But change is very frightening. And what is the antidote to change? The only possible antidote to change is your consciousness, where our sense of security and stability does not depend on the outer world conforming to our desires of what it should be. And that doesn't mean that we passively just accept everything that comes, that we never try to influence, that we're not dynamic and creative, but it's that our happiness does not depend on the outer world obeying our edicts. You know, because we can't do it. We just can't make it work. You know, all of us, we try. We stand up for causes that we believe in, but it's our consciousness that really influences. And if you think about it, every change that we know about in civilization always starts with a few people. I mean, look at Jesus Christ. His life didn't end very well. That did not look like somebody that people would remember. But he and 12 disciples, and one of them betrayed him, although they replaced him after that. But still, but they had inner power. You see, troubled times, we can talk now, and I've been talking enormously about the world around us, but troubled times, nobody even needs to know it's troubled times. If it's troubled times for you, what is the antidote to fear, to anxiety, to loneliness, to inability to love? It's changing our consciousness. And the word building in that is also really important, because it's not like we have a lot of momentum in the wrong direction. People always ask me about free will versus predestination and so on. I mean, I'm standing in front of you, but I've stood in front of a lot of audiences, and when I give you a chance to ask questions, somebody always asks me, and I always wish they wouldn't, because it's a very hard question to answer. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, we influence our experience. Everybody can tell that we do. If you act in such a way that you're building an understanding, and you're building a resiliency, and you're building wisdom, you're building the capacity to love and forgive, your life is very different than if you live resentfully and in a curmudgeonly way, and in a everybody's no damn good and they ought to be thinking about me. Swami Kriyananda was marvelous at making jokes. He was very funny, but he would also make lots of jokes about wrong attitudes that we might be inclined to embrace seriously, so that when we actually started to embrace them, there would just a little bit of you would be embarrassed. And so I followed in his words, and oftentimes I have a favorite phrase, which is, "Nobody cares about me but me," you know? And it's partly true and partly not true, but it's just a way of just making fun of what you might be inclined to think. Nobody cares about me. Believe me, I've thought that for real too many times. They don't understand me. They don't, nobody cares about me but me, like this. But as soon as we feel that, we're living in hell. It doesn't matter what's going on around us. If we're depressed and sad and frightened, above all fear is the worst. St. John in the Bible, perfect love casts out all fear. That was one of the early aphorisms I learned. I didn't know it was St. John. I thought it came from elsewhere. But I knew that fear was the enemy. And I couldn't quite figure out what to do about that. Perfect love. So then the first thing you think is, oh, I'll find somebody who will love me perfectly. I'll get a husband or a wife, or I'll have a baby. My baby will love me. All these different ways. But he wasn't talking about that kind of love. He was also not only talking about the love that comes into us. He was talking about the love that comes from us. It's the love that we give that makes us fearless. And we can't love people. That isn't enough. We have to be in contact with a wholly different dimension of reality. We have to have the awareness that there is another dimension to reality. Who am I? What is real? Where does my life come from? These are really big questions. You don't answer them by reading one book and then being able to quote it. You answer it on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis by making that your quest. Whatever else you're doing, that has to be your quest. What will make me fearless? Is fearlessness possible? Because fear is what messes everything up. I was sharing with friends earlier today, a number of years ago, maybe even 25 years ago, in California, this very wonderful group, I would call them quasi-spiritual. They were expansive thinkers. They weren't devotees. They weren't disciples in this way, but they were very expansive. And they were political in their expansiveness, and they created an initiative an anti-nuclear initiative. The details are unclear to me. I think they wanted to make California a nuclear-free zone or something like that. Very intelligent, educated people made these magnificent presentations, organized themselves beautifully. It was defeated, of course, but they did a very good job. They came to Ananda, the community I lived in. They wanted our group, and Swami Kriyananda especially, to join them because he had a lot of moral authority and was well known. So they made this presentation, which was brilliantly done. I admired it. Even though I didn't like it, I admired it. Nuclear bomb of a certain size falls on the city of Chicago. And then they had all these marvelous tables and pictures. How many people are vaporized instantly? How many people become a ring of ash around the vaporized people? How many people will die in 2 weeks? How many of them will die in 6 months? How many of them will be deformed? You know, it was horrific. And it was true. All of it was true. And so Swami dutifully watched this, and after it was done, the first thing he said was he commended them for their sincerity. He commended them for their noble intention. He complimented them on the quality of the program. And then he said, when your objective is peace, he said, fear is the wrong tactic. I mean, think about that. And what is going on in the world? And everybody's afraid of everybody. And we're just all fighting each other. Some people for causes that you think are right, some that other people think are right. But what really changes? The quality of our consciousness is what changes. I have had this dramatically demonstrated because of the life I live, the number of people I know, and the way I'm perceived. I have been invited to be present when people have died, because I find death to be a marvelously inspiring subject, not even slightly morbid. And if you go to my YouTube channel and type in the word death and dying, I talk about it a lot. I've been in situations where the only person in the room who was in tune with what I represent was the person who was dying. Or in some cases, one other relative who brought me in, but the whole room is something else, completely else. But it's been fascinating to me because one of the distinguishing characteristics that I can bring into that room is that death doesn't frighten me. And I don't mind talking about it, and I'm not afraid to say, oh, guess what, you're dying. You know, like here we are, what are we going to do about this? And I've discovered that one person in the room who is not afraid changes the whole room. Now, what is the limit of that? You know, how far does that extend? But we can't get that way just by hoping that it'll happen. It has to be, we have to build it. And everything that you build, it's the patient application of willpower. And if you want to build spiritual power in your own consciousness, it has to be a conscious decision that you then put energy into. And the wonderful thing about this, I love this, it's totally portable and you always have it with you. It's not a hobby like making costumes for a theater or something like that where you have to have all this equipment around you. Wherever you are, guess what? So you're there. Ha-ha. Whatever is happening, you have a choice about your attitude. Whatever's going on, you always can work on it. I mean, I found that thrilling. And what's also fun about it is the end result is infinite. So you just keep going. Death itself doesn't stop you. You just keep going. As Yogananda put it, you keep on evolving until you achieve endlessness. So you build the spiritual power, spiritual because it's not subject to the laws of the material universe. Death, suffering, disease, success, happiness, failure, it's all just part of it. And we can work on our consciousness in all those positions. And when we have mastery over ourselves, we have mastery over everything. Right? Everybody who really succeeds in life, even in the most materialistic ways, they have some form of mastery, don't they? Maybe they were born talented because of reincarnation. The karma's in motion already. But nonetheless, they can do it. They can intuit. They can put aside their fears. They can do it. Why can't we? Of course we can. We're all made exactly the same. So we build that power, and it stands against the destructive force of troubled times. And those troubled times, if the prophecies are true and everything is going to be quite chaotic on this planet, which seems logical at this point, I don't see the people who are determined. In the country that I live in, we're going through a remarkable experience that we've never been through before. Just watching the country fracture and, watching the gun violence and everything, it's quite remarkable. I live in a very sophisticated area, and during the COVID time, there was this one place that is like 5 minutes from where I live, and I would go by and I always noticed this long line of people outside it. Turns out it was a gun shop. Yeah. So where I live, hundreds and hundreds of guns have been just put into the neighborhood. I mean, you would not think about it. This is Stanford University territory, Who knows? So if the troubled times take that form, that's one thing. If the troubled times are just the inevitable changes and heartbreaking disappointments and unwanted, what I call, if Divine Mother, as I think of God in that form, if Divine Mother takes an unwelcome interest in our spiritual growth and puts before us challenges we would not have chosen, if we have been building spiritual power to stand against those troubled times, won't we be glad that we've done that? That was when Swami started talking about this in the 80s. He said, take heed. Many years ago, I had this very complicated question in my head. I have a rather complicated mind. And because I was born into a Jewish family in 1947. And our families had come out of Europe several generations before, out of Eastern Europe. So no one that was connected to my immediate family was in Europe or affected by it. But nonetheless, it affected me. And so I always had this thought in my mind of, what if I was in a concentration camp? And I thought everybody always thought about being in concentration camps. I only recently found out that they don't. We just live inside our own minds. I was a little surprised when I said to a couple of my friends, of course, because of the concentration camps. And they said, what? I said, don't you think about this all the time? Never, they said back to me. Oh, well, that's interesting. Actually, this concern of mine finally went away when my friend, I was talking to her about it, she pointed out to me that I lived in California. By now I'm, from the point of view of how much usefulness I have left in my life, I'm relatively speaking an old woman. There's no sign of any of this happening. And finally she said, even if you were arrested and carted off, they just shoot you because you're too old to keep around. Which she could say that to me because she knows me. I thought that was hysterically funny. I thought it was so funny we actually had to stop walking and sit down on the curb and laugh for a few minutes. But the effect of it was I stopped worrying about it because now they'll just shoot me. I won't have to live there. But in any case, I used to think I was going to have to live there. And I'd seen enough movies and read enough books because I had an interest. And so I said to Swamiji, what if? What if I'm in the line and they're counting me and then they start brutalizing the person next to me? Yeah. And so should I jump in front of them and try to save the person next to me, or should I just let it happen? I finally realized he's a person I could ask. And he knows me well enough. He listened very attentively to the whole thing. And then in his extraordinary way, he asked the question I was really asking. He said, what you're asking is, in a moment of crisis, how can you know what God wants you to do? How can you know what higher wisdom, with your superconscious self, however God, Guru, however you think about it, but some power greater than your ordinary mind, because that's what you need. You can't logic it out. Maybe you'd make things much worse by intervening. There's just so many different questions. How can you know in a moment of crisis what the superconscious divine response would be? And he said, the only way you'll know in a moment of crisis is if you have practiced when it was easier. And that has been the mantra of my life ever since. Practice when it's easier. There's no moment of life when you're not building spiritual power or building negative power or wasting all your time. What are we really doing? Every minute we are building the momentum that's going to create the next minute. This is karma. This is the law of cause and effect in human relationships, in human life. We're building a pattern of response, a habit, and magnetism within us which will pull us in the same direction. If you lose your temper 1,000 times, 1,001, that force is going to take you over. And until you put a rock in the river and force the river to flow in a new direction, you'll just keep going with the current like that. At what point do we stop? Every moment is that same choice. A woman came to me, she had this terrible relationship with her mother, and with all due respect, I think it was justified. She was very unfortunate in her upbringing. She was terribly angry with her mother, and she wanted me to help her overcome it. I said, well, are you inclined to be angry? Oh, no, she said, just with my mother. Mm-hmm. So I kind of tootled around the edges, she yells at the drivers on the freeway. She's really irritated with her coworkers because they don't wash their coffee cups. She went on and on. And anger was her way of responding to life. And this was the biggest form of it, but it was her habit. And there was no chance that she could dismantle it at the peak. I said, but let's start nibbling around the edges. Let's start practicing when it's easier. Let's reverse this momentum so that your first response is a kind one and not one that's dark like that. I had a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine. This is one of my more wonderful experiences. When you're in a position of leadership, you attract quite remarkable experiences sometimes. And in my early years in the community I helped found in Palo Alto, where I'm actually not the spiritual director anymore, I'm emeritus. I'm still in residence, but I still have library privileges. I can still teach graduate seminars, but I get to pick and choose. That's why I'm here. That's how I can be here. And they're wonderful about supporting me. But at the very beginning, I used to give all the Sunday services and all the classes. I was just always at the microphone. And this other gentleman who, for various reasons, had to attend also because he had contributing things that he did, so he had to listen to me. And he just came to me, and somehow he thought this would be helpful. He said, many people find you inspiring, but I don't. It was just perfect. But what happened, I'm so proud of myself, what happened to me was this incredible wave of compassion for him. Instead of thinking about me being insulted, I said, oh, you poor man. I said, I talk all the time. It must be terrible for you. But I'd been practicing when it was easier for a long time. So when he just said that to me, I had learned not to think about what it meant to me, but what about it meant to him. Now, it was small, but your pop quizzes are sometimes very gratifying because they're little like that. Do you know what I mean? But that's what I'm talking about. In a moment of crisis, where will your mind go? Your mind will go where it's always gone. So if you want to build some spiritual power to stand against troubled times, today is a good day to start, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Okay. I am the representative of my teachers, and I simply offer to you what was offered to me because I thank them from the depths of my heart every day. And this is how one expresses gratitude, is you take what's important and you pass it on. But you see what a difference it makes? Now all of you, I hope, at least some of you, will go home and think about this. And if just one idea that I poured out to you shifts your consciousness even a little toward the light, we'll have started creating something that will be very, very different in this world. This is not a question, but there's a thought that's very important. Everything in this world is created in 3 stages. Look at this building. It wasn't always here. You know, this is not an inherent part of planet Earth. Somebody had the idea that we would build this. And many, many people have ideas, all kinds of ideas. So an idea starts, but then you have to put energy behind that thought. And it's energy maybe in the form of money, but then the architect and the builders and the designers and the city planners and blah, blah, blah. Lots and lots and lots of energy, and that idea finally manifests. So we think by the time it's on the material plane, that's the beginning. It's actually the end. Because all this had to start first. And what's happening now is an entirely new thought forms are coming onto the planet. Entirely new. And many people are putting energy behind those thought forms. I have been part of the founding of 2 communities that were nowhere on the horizon, except that Yogananda had the idea, Swami Kriyananda picked it up, he conveyed it to some of us, we put out a lot of energy. Now for the last 50 years, I've lived in these wonderful communities, 2 different communities. We've started a school for children. We have a whole new educational system running. One of the gentlemen with us, Aryavanu, standing in the back, works in India training teachers in a whole new way of educating children. Idea, energy, manifestation. Right now, a lot of people have power, but they are the past. The future is these new ideas. And each one of us who puts energy into it moves that forward. Do not think for a moment that your consciousness is not important. You have no idea. Everything is individual consciousness. So, I'm very grateful if it's been meaningful to you. Is there another question in the room? Yes, sir.
First of all, I'm super thankful for your time tonight. I'm considering me that spider, but I'm very little in this world. I don't know if the spiritual power is the power we need to build against the troubled times. How do I validate that fact?
I'm sorry, could you just say it just slightly more slowly? I got most of what you said, but not all of it. You said, I'm not sure.
How do I validate the fact?
Oh, validate.
Yeah, the spiritual power is the power that I need to build against the troubled times.
Right. Oh, that's a perfectly good question. Why should you take my word for it? And that's important. When I met Swami Kriyananda, I immediately recognized him, past lives, I'm sure. The faith I had in him never changed, not an iota, from literally the first time I saw him. I never doubted him, but a whole lot of what he said didn't make any sense to me. And sometimes I thought some of the things he said were completely nuts, just totally. And I was caught between the fact that I had so much faith in him, but I also had a lot of faith in me. And if it didn't make sense to me, I couldn't just mindlessly accept it. However, there was enough that attracted me that I would experiment with the parts that I could understand. And experimenting with the parts that I could understand, okay, see, you can either say, I'm going to sit here until I understand this. And of course, the reason we don't understand it is because we don't have the capacity to understand it, or we don't have a clear enough consciousness to have intuition to understand it. And if we refuse to do anything until we do understand it, we are not doing anything to increase our awareness or to change ourselves, which would give us a new perspective. So one has to understand that it's directional, change is directional, and it happens one step at a time. But if I take no steps, because I don't know where the whole thing is, then I'll never change and I'll never learn. So one takes the tiniest part of what you can really believe in, or at least believe in enough that you'll conduct the experiment, conduct an honest experiment, and then see what happens. And what happens is, when energy starts moving, energy has its own intelligence, and it begins to teach us. So the only possible way you can validate anything I've said is to test it in your own life. And Yogananda said that you only have to do 1% of what he taught to make enormous spiritual progress. He said, but everybody will do a different 1%, and that's why he had to talk so much and teach so much. So with all of you in the room, I'm trying to offer, enough different options that one piece of it will make sense to you, and then try not to reject what you don't yet understand. I had a mental closet, and I would gather up the pieces of what Swami said that I didn't understand, but they were a gift from someone I respected too much and I couldn't throw away. And so I would just put them up on that shelf. They've sat up there. By now I think I've taken everything down. But I didn't keep them in the front, I kept them over here. And I worked on what worked, and then gradually I would find that I'd pull it off and I would think, well, that's perfectly reasonable. Why did I not get that? But I'd had enough experience by then to make it true. Okay? Swami always said, I prefer an honest argument to a mindless yes. And in fact, in our educational system, the founder, Nitai, said, with the children, he said, you always watch for two things, mindless rebellion or mindless acquiescence, because both of them are equally unwholesome for the child. So, same for us, we're just children. We just have big bodies, and we get to pick out our own clothes. That's the difference. Kavita, I think we're running toward the end. Do you want to come up and make an announcement? Thank you all very much. It's great. I feel just delighted and privileged to be with you. Thank you so much. God bless.
Come gather round, let joy sing out today. Dawn now is breaking, and the mountains say, it's only light can make the darkness run. Lift up your head, greet the rising sun. Greet the rising sun. Some people think to harvest happiness by weeding troubles, easing every stress. The trouble is that troubles never end. Get rid of one, and you face its friend. And you face its friend. It's in your heart. The songs of joy resound. You'll hear but echoes in the world around. Wind on a hill sounds lonely if you're sad, free if you're free, cheerful if you're glad. Cheerful if you're glad. Friends, come with me. We'll chant of battles won, shots not of anger. Joy will be our gun. Before the light, the veils of sorrow rend. In inner freedom, all delusions end. All delusions end. Thank you. Though green summer fade and winter draw near, my Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempest, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my friend. Thank you.